So, 23rd Psalm. This is the New Revised Standard Version. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Now, I know that most of you are very familiar with the King James Version. I saw some of you reciting it very well, despite what Carter might have said in his criticism of you. But I'll listen for these words. Yeah, it's not on the slides, Kathy, so just listen. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. And surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The 23rd Psalm is perhaps the most comforting words in Scripture. And although the psalm mentions dangers and darkness and death, it is really a psalm of comfort, light, and life. It reminds us that even when our lives seem the darkest and death may be imminent, God is there with us. Psalm 23 speaks to us of life and the enduring presence of our loving God. Psalm 23 is a featured guest at most funerals. The words have guided and comforted people throughout the troubles of their lives, and then it comforts those who grieve the loss of a loved one. It speaks of hope, of God's blessings, both in this life and beyond the shadow of death. What other passages may take chapters or even books to say Psalm 23 speaks to us in 6 short verses? The psalm starts out with a powerful declaration. The Lord is my shepherd. The psalm speaks in pastoral terms. Most of us don't live in the agrarian lifestyle as they did in the days of King David or Jesus. But even though we do not witness great green pastures and bountiful watering holes in our daily life, we can still appreciate the image of docile sheep being cared for by a vigilant and strong shepherd. A shepherd's duty was to protect the sheep from wolves, bears, and lions. He was to watch and guide the sheep to make sure that they did not go astray or get lost. Now, some of those shepherds were also women or girls, believe it or not, and they were to provide the food and the water for the sheep. Now, in similar fashion, a king was to do the same for his people, although the wolves, the bears, and the lions came in more human forms. And going astray might be more a matter of ethics and customs than location. In other words, a shepherd was a metaphor for a king. Kings in the Middle East were often referred to as shepherds. So, what do we declare in the opening sentence of Psalm 23? The Lord is my shepherd. Do we profess a loyalty to an earthly king, or to some organization or some government? Do we proclaim allegiance to a prophet or maybe some celebrity? No. We announce that God is our shepherd. The one who guides us and directs us is God. The one whom we put our ultimate trust for our well-being and care is God. The one whom we want to stay in the closest of relationships with is God. We declare that when we are lost, it is God whom we will seek for guidance. We declare that when we need sustenance and nourishment for our souls, it is God whom we will seek to fill those spirits. We declare that when we are threatened in darkness and danger just surround us, we will find safety and comfort in God's presence. We declare that we have surrendered our lives into God's hands. And we say, well, others may worship and follow a human being like some earthly king, some celebrity, a political party. But as for me, the Lord is my shepherd, and no one else. I follow the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Having declared our ultimate allegiance to God, we go on to describe the goodness of God's providence. The first thing we confess is, I shall not want. Now, this is not a confession of a lack of desire, but rather it is a lack of need. Other translations put it this way: I lack nothing, or I have everything I need, or I don't need a thing. When we are in the presence of God, in a right relationship with God, we have no needs. Everything that we might desire or lack or need is either vastly unimportant or irrelevant. When we are truly aware of God's presence and surrender to God's will, we have all that we need. We find that God's presence is what we have been seeking all along. All the other things like security and comfort is money, status, position, all these things are all earthly things secondary to the importance of God. Even our need for food and shelter and water are secondary because in God our souls are safe in a place where we will no longer need such material things. This is not to say that we should be able to go without fulfilling our physical needs and the material needs of others. It is to say that even if we are unable to secure these things for ourselves and continue our earthly lives, our souls are safe in God's care. Food and water will sustain us for a while. Shelter will protect us for a while. Money, status, and power are fickle and unreliable for our security and comfort, and you can't take it with you. Only God provides the presence and power beyond the realm of earthly existence. Only God is reliable to keep our souls safe and secure. In verse 2, God is like a shepherd who leads his sheep to a place of green pastures, where there is an endless source of nourishment and all is safe. With God, our souls experience a fulfillment like sheep do in fields of green grass or a lush meadow of grass. The sheep are so well provided for and safe by the shepherd that they can lie down and rest comfortably. The sheep don't have to stand, ready to run at a moment's notice because of danger. This peaceful scene is further reinforced by the shepherd leading the sheep to quiet pools of water. No fast-running streams or violent swollen rivers, too dangerous to drink from for these sheep. No, the shepherd takes his sheep to a place where his sheep can safely drink their fill. God will provide our spirits with a safe and bountiful place where we will find life-giving refreshment. As it says in verse 3, God restores my soul. Hebrew word here, translated in the King James as soul, is nephesh. Nephesh can also mean breath, strength, or appetite. This verse might better be translated as God renews my life. When we are burdened with life's troubles and demands, when we are crippled by an overload of hurt and heartache, when we are overwhelmed by tragedy and trials, we seek out our shepherd, and God refreshes our spirits, restores our souls, renews our life. God breathes new life into us, giving us strength and the desire to go on living. Yes, life may have knocked me down, but God's Spirit has picked me up again. The rest of verse 3 says, He leads me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Another way to translate this part of the verse is, God guides me in the right paths as God has promised. Or, The Lord is true to God's name and leads us along the right paths. Or we might say, the shepherd leads us along the correct trails to a safe and fulfilling place because that is the way God is. God's nature is always to do good for us. We may wonder about the way or the path that God leads us when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. There are many ways to translate this phrase. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, or the dark valley of death, or even if I were to walk in a ravine as dark as death. The essential meaning of the phrase is profound darkness where there is the threat of deadly danger. As if the shepherd were leading the sheep through a dark ravine or some valley. This was often a reality, when shepherds had to lead the sheep to fertile pastures high up on a mountainside. The steep walls prevent sunlight from shining down onto the trail, and the path is covered in dark shadows. The darkness and steep walls give a terrible place for the sheep to face an ambush by some predator. We might even call such a place a death trap. In our lives, we all have had to face times and places of deep darkness. We all have experienced a time when it seemed that the walls were closing in. The shadows grew darker and deeper, and there was nowhere to escape. Some of us have had the devastation of losing a job, losing a house. Maybe you have had the heartbreak of divorce, the death of a parent, a spouse, a child. Perhaps you have or you are facing the shadow of a prolonged illness and injury. There are many, many valleys of death's darkness in our lives. Some of us have had darker experiences than others, but each of us has had to bear our own pain and walk through that dark valley. There are places in our world today where people are walking in a dark valley. In 2011, Japan was changed forever when over 15,000 people died in a tsunami. In 2010, the people of Haiti faced a cataclysmic earthquake, taking nearly 250,000 lives. And then there was the biblical-sized earthquake and tsunami of 2004 in Indonesia. These were times of great darkness brought about by nature. From the darkness of despair and anger, the victims cry out, "Why does God allow these things to happen? Why do we have to suffer?" We may never understand that question, why, in our lifetime, but the book of Lamentations 3, verse 3, assures us that God does not willingly afflict or grieve anyone. But we have much darkness caused by human intent as well. New struggles join with old conflicts, and the dark and the sun-drenched lands of the Middle East. Tyrants slaughter their own people to hold on to power. And terrorism can strike at any time, anywhere. Recently, we witnessed the worst mass shooting in American history in Las Vegas. Man killed 58 people and wounded hundreds for some unknown dark reason. There is much darkness of evil intent in the human heart and in the suffering of people caused by other people. But Psalm 23 does not answer the question why we suffer. It does provide us comfort in the times when we suffer. We walk through the valley of the shadow of death without fear of the deadly darkness around us because our shepherd God is with us. God knows the way. God sees in the darkness, as Psalm 139 says, "Even the darkness is not darkness to you. The night is as bright as day, for darkness is as light to you." God isn't blinded by evil. We do not fear the darkness of unseen and unknown evil that may be ready to attack us because the shepherd's rod and staff are there to protect our souls from harm. A shepherd would carry a club and a rod, or a staff or a crook, as you might call it, as weapons against attack. In God's case, the rod is compassion, and the staff is love. Compassion and love are the best weapons against the dark evil around us. In verse 5, we change the metaphor but not the meaning. You prepare a banquet before me in the presence of my enemies. Although we are surrounded by evil, God protects us in such a way that we can enjoy a feast without fear of being attacked. We may have tons of hurt coming our way, but with our hearts centered and focused on God, it feels as though we are having a spiritual feast in the midst of worldly turmoil. Next we read, you anoint my head with oil. Strange one for us, but in ancient times it was customary for a host to pour oil over a special guest's head. So that we might better understand this phrase by translating it, you welcome me as an honored guest into your home. God does not casually or indifferently accept us. God embraces us in close relationship. God welcomes us with outstretched arms, as the father of the prodigal son did with his wayward offspring. We're treated as an honored guest, or as a long-lost child returning home. It all means that God gives us extravagant hospitality. God provides acceptance in a measure to fill our cups to overflowing. God's love and grace are so plentiful and abounding that there is no end to God's graciousness. When we think that we have enough, God gives more. The sixth and final verse of Psalm 23 sums up what has preceded us in the psalm. The King James says, your goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The key words in the first part of this verse are goodness and mercy, as the King James translates it. God's goodness in the Hebrew is the word tob, which means God's good things of practical benefit and well-being. But it's much easier to say goodness, yes. The word mercy is hesed. Hesed is the Hebrew word that means loving kindness or steadfast love. It is hesed that binds Ruth to her mother-in-law Naomi. It is hesed which describes the love that God has that will not let God's people go. This is an unconditional, everlasting love, so some translate this phrase as, your kindness and love will always be with me, or I know your goodness and love will be with me all my life. But the word that really makes a difference is how we understand God's goodness and steadfast love is shall follow me. We picture an old goodness and mercy walking behind us like an old fat dog. A wonderfully loyal but terribly sluggish old friend having a difficult time trying to keep up with us. And nothing could be further from the truth. The word so often translated as follow is better rendered as pursue or chase after. God's goodness and love are not plodding behind us, barely keeping up, but rather God's blessing and unwavering love is chasing us down, it's pursuing us. God is not just walking along with us, sauntering down some country highway. God is chasing after us like a safety going for a halfback who has broke through the line and is heading for the goal line. God is pursuing us like an Arctic wolf relentlessly pursues a caribou mile after mile and day after day until the caribou falls exhausted. God keeps after us, hoping that we will fall exhausted from running away from the Lord. God's chasing us. God is pursuing us to give us goodness and love, but we keep running away, either in fear because we do not recognize true goodness for us, or because we are arrogant, believing that we can do it for ourselves. We don't need God. God says, go ahead. Yeah, run, believing that you can do it all on your own. I'm right behind you, and when you're ready, I'm there if you need me. God's goodness and love are pursuing us. So my suggestion is surrender to it. Get tackled. And when we surrender to God's goodness and loving kindness, we will know the presence of God in its fullness. and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The New Revised Standard Version and others say, I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long, which many people find not as comforting. But the original meaning could be rendered, I make my home in the house of God for all time to come. Many Christians and Jews believe that all time to come includes the eternity after death, and so we can rightly say forever. When we surrender to God's goodness and love and follow God's will, then we will live in the timeless presence of our loving God. Although we are mindful of the valley of the shadow of death in Psalm 23, the psalm is really about life and living fully, and we live fully in God's presence. God's presence is so full of life and love that even in the darkest valley of our lives, when defeat and death seem at hand, we need not fear the evil and danger around us, because God is with us, keeping our souls safe and our spirits from failing. We may not realize that God is here with us in dark times, just as we're not aware of the air that is around us and giving us strength. But Psalm 23 reminds us that God is always with us to bless us forever with love. Amen.